Hey everyone, Nick here and welcome back to GamerTube, and welcome back to our Little Nightmares character concepts series. So in today's video, we'll be taking a look at the Welder. So some viewers out there have suggested a Welder-like character, so before we do our own spin on it. So like always, we'll go through their location, their abilities, their gameplay mechanics, and all that good stuff as well. Also, today's character was actually designed by yours truly, so I thought I'd give it a crack and actually design my own Little Nightmares character. So with all that, I hope you enjoy the Welder. And like always, we will just state that these are just a couple of our own ideas. We don't really expect Bandai Namco or Tarsier Studios to take these ideas and make a game like number 3 or a DLC. These are just some fun stories that we get to tell, and we hope you enjoy. And lastly, before we start today's video, if you could please consider leaving a like and commenting, and also be sure to subscribe as it really does help out our channel, and it keeps you up to date with all the new uploads we do. Alrighty, well, let's get into the Welder. So we first arrive at the Welder's location, the steel mill. This dark and lonely factory is where the Welder's workshop is located. This is the place where the Welder does all their work making custom metal objects and devices for their special clients. The Welder works day and night, but they don't work alone. This is when we're introduced to the Helper. The Helper is one of the many children that the Welder has captured. The Welder forces these poor children to power the machinery that runs the factory. These children would always be behind cages whilst they run through all the passages and operate the various mechanisms to assess the Welder while they work. So we'd start off with the Helper sitting in their cage surrounded by the other Helper children. As the Helper wakes up, they hear the sound of the factory whistle. The old factory steam whistle signified a new day of work has begun. All the cage doors buzz open as the children get to work. In this gameplay segment, the player would have to complete various tasks in order to help the sinister Welder. The first task would be to run on a miniature generator wheel to power all the electrical equipment. The player would have to run faster and faster in order to supply power. If they didn't keep up the pace, the Welder would lose their patience and shock the cage. After this task is completed, the next would be to pump the bellows to keep the fires in the forges going. The player would have to jump up and down on the bellows to pump air into the fires. Once again, the player would have to keep up the pace or they would be punished by the cruel Welder. We then come to their last task of the day, which is passing tools to the Welder himself. The player would have to drag numerous different tools over to the gap in the cage and into the hands of the Welder. If the player grabs the incorrect tool, the Welder would bang on the cage until you grab the right one. Eventually, the screen fades to black and we see all the children returning to their cages for the night. The Welder opens the other side of their cages and gives each of the children a measly piece of bread to eat. Whilst eating, the Helper notices that their cage doesn't exactly look like it's shut correctly. They drop their piece of bread and go to investigate. They push on their cage door as hard as they can, and then all of a sudden it breaks open. They did it, the Helper was free. But they couldn't just leave all the other helpless children with this evil Welder. They had to find a way to free them all. The Helper had to find a source of power that was keeping all the cage doors locked. They hop down onto the ground and look at their surroundings. The large, empty factory was cold and quiet. As they walk through the dark metal workshop, they come across a large door with an electrical symbol on it. The Helper tries to open it, but soon realizes that the door is locked shut. Whatever's behind this door must be powering all the locks for the cages. The Helper needs to find a key somewhere in this dark, dreary workshop. As they continue to explore around the workshop, they notice some flashes of light in the darkness. It was the Welder. He seemed to be up late working on some custom projects. As the Helper peeks around the curtain, they finally get a better look at the Welder. The Welder is a large hulking character wearing dirty overalls and a large rusty old welder's mask. It looks like the Welder doesn't actually require a blowtorch to weld. It seems like all they need to do is touch the metal with their finger and a bright flash of sparks would appear as the red hot metal is fused together. While staring at the welder, they notice in the corner of their eye the electrical room key hanging up on the workbench. In this gameplay segment, the player would have to climb up on the workbench and carefully and quietly sneak up and grab the key off its hook. The player would have to be extra careful not to make a sound, as the welder would notice them and run over and grab them. When the welder captures the player, they could blind them with an extremely bright flash of light from their finger, ensuring that they can never see or escape again. There would be multiple times the player would need to stay still when they see the welder stop working or turn around to grab some materials. Once the player has finally made it up to the top, they grab the key and jump down from the shelf, but they accidentally drop a glass jar of nails. The glass jar falls down and smashes on the ground. The welder stops and looks over at the escaped child standing on their workbench. They both stare for a moment until the welder quickly runs towards the child in a mad panic. The helper quickly jumps down and tries to get away. Whilst the helper runs for their lives, they come across another door. They quickly run through the door to hide from this crazed welder. They now find themselves in a dark, unfamiliar room. The welder bursts through the door and quickly shuts it. The welder knows the helper is somewhere in this room and they won't let them escape. The welder draws their finger down the edge of the door with a large flash of sparks and light. As they draw their finger down, they weld the door shut, fusing the red hot metal together tightly. The helper now has to find another way out of this room since their only exit has been sealed. With the door being welded shut, the room is now darker than ever before. The player won't be able to see what's in front of them until the welder lights up the room with a spark of light from their finger. Every time the welder sparks up to light the room, the player can see for a short while and figure out how to escape. The player would notice a bunch of boxes in the corner of the room and quickly start to drag them away, revealing a small air vent. The player would have to move quickly in order to avoid the approaching welder, who is still lighting up the room with sparks of their finger. Once all the boxes had been moved out of the way, the helper would quickly escape through the vent. When they come to the end of the vent, they now find themselves in the storage room. This is the room where the welder stores all their finished projects for all their clients. Strange looking objects hang on the walls and little metal trinkets are lined up displayed on the table. All these objects are different items that the welder has been contracted to make for certain clients. As the helper walks through the room, they see the door that leads back out to the main workshop floor. But the door handle is far too high for them to reach. In this gameplay segment, the child would have to use the strange objects in the room to make a pile that they can climb up and grab the door handle. Once the helper has dragged all the items over, they can now reach the door handle. As the door opens, they arrive back in the main area. The helper walks over to the electrical room door and finally unlocks it. As they walk through the door, they can see a giant power generator with multiple wires connected to it. It becomes clear to the helper that the welder never needed the children to operate the mechanisms to supply power to the factory. This generator has been doing it for them all along. The cruel welder simply just wanted to torture these poor helpers. The helper isn't sure which wire is connected to the cage doors, so instead they just decide to pull out every cord they can. As they approach the power generator, they hear the loud footsteps of the welder right behind them. They turn around and see the welder standing in the doorway. They must have melted their way through the door that they welded shut and quickly rush back to find them in the electrical room. The welder advances forward as the helper quickly starts to pull out one of the plugs. As the welder gets closer, the helper pulls out a plug and in a desperate attempt to protect themselves, they throw the plug at the welder. All of a sudden, to their surprise, a spark of electricity jumps from the welder's finger and into the electrical plug, giving the welder an electric shock. The welder must be some sort of conductive power source themselves. The welder freezes for a moment, then slowly continues to advance forward towards the child. In this boss battle segment, the player would have to work quickly and pull out all of the plugs and throw them towards the welder. With every plug that they pull out, they would need to throw it towards the welder, giving them a shock and rendering them motionless for a moment. While the welder is frozen in an electric shock, they would also have to focus on pulling out the largest plug in the middle. After the player is down to the last plug, they can finally yank it out. When they do, they hear all the power from the factory disappear. Little did they know, they actually caused all the power from the whole city to disappear. As the helper holds the large plug in their hands, they throw it towards the welder. A large arc of electricity jumps from the plug and right through the welder's body. Their body starts to emit smoke as they continue to get electrified. The welder just stands in place, smoke flowing from their burnt clothes. It seems that the welder won't be moving anytime soon after a shock like that. The helper walks past them and into the main area. They can see all the other helpers' cages have been opened as they jump down and escape out the entrance of the factory. The helper watches them all leave and slowly follows after them. As the helper exits the factory, they finally set foot out of the horrible place, and for the first time in a long time, they were free. Alrighty everyone, that's all we have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider leaving a like, commenting, and subscribing, as it helps our channel out a lot and it is greatly appreciated. Like always, be sure to comment down below what you thought of today's character and what you'd like to see going forward in Little Nightmares. Alrighty, well, until the next video, I'll catch you later, bye.